11:11. We've got one more speaker to come on, two more speakers, apologies, to come on, and that will be Councillor Daniel Whooley from Fingal County Council and our very own Magdalena Sedlmayr. She's a part-time officer ourselves, and both Daniel and Magdalena are students with TU Dublin, TU Dublin. So it's really exciting to have you guys talking on the impact of climate change and leadership. So guys, you've kind of seen the kind of layout so far. It's about 15 minutes or so to chat. I'm going to raise my hand to let you know when time. In 2 seconds, I'm getting feedback here. So yeah, I'm going to raise my hand when it gets towards the 15-minute mark. And thank you so much for your patience, by the way. We'll have a short break after this. If anyone has any questions throughout, use the Q&A function. And we are recording this for anyone that's here later on. And don't be afraid to use a thumbs up or a love heart to give the guys some love, especially as they're talking. But thank you so much. And I'm going to give you the floor. Thanks, guys. Magdalena, if you want to kick off, that'd be great.
Yes. Hello. Hi. Nice to meet you, Daniel. Yes. So my question to you would be, how did you get engaged in politics in the Green Party? Because I've often that's something that really helps people to see where do people find the motivation?
Well, I guess for most young people, climate change is like a growing focal issue for a lot of people, and like myself growing up, I remember seeing the IPCC reports, well, one of the first ones, must have been 18 or 19 on TV, and it scared the living daylight out of me. And from there, I got involved in Extinction Rebellion when they were much bigger back in the day, and then that led to me getting involved in the Green Party. And then I decided to run. I genuinely did not think I was ever going to win. I was 20 years old. I was in my first year of college. I was thinking, who on earth is going to vote for me? But I was lucky enough to run in the same area that I grew up in. So for better or for worse, I knew a lot of people in the area and they knew me. And it meant then going on doors and knocking around. People knew me straight away. And I already had a reputation of, for better or for worse, being maybe a bit of a troublemaker, but trying to do the right thing. And people took a chance. And for that, I will always be grateful for. And it changed my life. And I'm lucky enough to be here. What about yourself? How did you get involved?
Lucy, you have a question? Sorry. No. No, that's just a coincidence. Yes. So personally, I think equality has always been a big topic for me. When I was like, I think it's part in my family or what we talk about. It has influenced that, but also when I changed secondary school, I went from a lower or less rich secondary school, lower social background secondary school, to a higher, richer secondary school with more privileged students who were just very unaware of the disparities in society. And I think that has made me passionate about there being social differences. And so I always thought I would go into this area, or I would that is what I feel has to be changed about society. But as I grew older, and especially in 2019 and 20, when I saw it on the media, that there is this climate thing, when I started to understand it more, and then I was just wondering, why is this such a big and dangerous topic, and everyone seems to have heard about this, understand it somewhat, and why aren't people doing more? I really had this strong feeling of, why isn't there enough being done? So I felt like, okay, then I will do something. So I started to slowly get involved. I texted my local climate group, and since 3 years now, I've been a climate activist with Fridays for Future, and have gone on to do many other things. But yeah, that's I would say how that all came about. Yeah.
I'd love to know your thoughts and how, particularly because I obviously have a very different experience working directly as a councillor, but how you feel like young voices are respected or treated as a climate activist from the outside to political parties. And like, obviously, I'm thinking how you think the Greens respect that outside voice, but also the other parties too, because for better or for worse, I think like the fact we're called the Greens, and I know obviously people disagree with us and our differences and all that, but climate is in some sense our core objective. But I'm thinking in other parties too, where that influence of climate on policy can make a huge difference. I'm thinking obviously Sinn Féin is a rising star, for lack of a better word, and the influence on climate change could be quite consequential, as for better or for worse they'll form a government soon, whether it's the next election or the election after. How do you feel like parties like them, or Fianna Fáil, or Fine Gael, or even the socialists take on climate change as an issue?
So personally, I haven't directly worked with any parties. I generally, my view is that all parties need to do more on climate change. I try to be neutral if possible there, because it's really a issue that is encounters all parts of society, and all parties should have a program on climate. Currently in government, from the government level, I would say there is not enough youth representation. Coming from Germany, I feel like in Ireland there's a lot to support second level students, and through the students union, ISU is very strong. There are many young people who are engaged in Cllr and Nog, and their local governments. At the same time, I don't see young people being invited to the decision-making table, and I think that would be necessary. Young people take up such a huge part of society, and they are such a big part of this present. They actively live and take part. So therefore, it is highly important that they also get to speak more to the decision makers. I have been to part of the National Youth Assembly on Climate, and then in the Climate Stakeholder Forum, where I got to speak to decision makers, and that's great, being able to give advice, and they should really listen to young people. But there is no representation within actual policy, or I haven't seen any representation in actual policy making in the decision making processes. It's rather talking to the people and talking to each other is great and important, but I would like to see more here. I think that's crucially important to embed young people more in society's decision making.
Sorry, Louise. Did you want to jump in, or?
No, I just had a question, but it's for later on. But I just actually might as well give you your 10-minute warning now. Go for it.
Sure. And that's really interesting, because my experience as being a young politician in the council, and I think I was lucky enough that there was a guy called Aaron O'Rourke he was ironically a day younger than me, but he was co-opted in for about a year or so, and then left. But other than that, I think the next youngest councillor would be in their early to mid 30s. So there's a significant age gap, maybe about 10 years between myself and the next person, and then that age gap kind of continues as you go on. And it is interesting to hear, obviously, when myself and other young councillors and other young people I talk to, climate change is so much higher on their priority list. It's generally housing, climate, one or two, and that the climate part in particular, because the housing crisis kind of dominates politics now, it's sort of been dropped at the leeway, and particularly the radical stuff. So and maybe I know Annie's here, and I'd love to pick her brain on this too, because a lot of the easy wins have been achieved by councils on that level. They really have, and it's the harder stuff, the stuff that gets more pushback, that people may choose to vote or not vote for somebody because of that. And it's trying to see if people will take that leadership. And in my mind, it goes back to the smoking ban in the early 90s, and even before that, the clean air regulations that came in. I think they were in the 60s and 70s, were very, very unpopular at the time. But as we look back at them now, we go, they were like, who on earth could be against this? And I would really like to see that courage, for lack of better words, across the spectrum, including my own party, because those radical leaps now, which will seem so obvious in 5-10 years time, need to be made now. Because if you wait long, or you try to implement them over a longer period, the impact either is worsened, and what's more important is the perception of them is worsened. And I think that's another thing that gets caught up in politics, for better for worse. Perception is everything. Optics is everything. And by taking those radical measures, by maybe, and I'm thinking of Metro or Bus Connects, they're really important because how much they can change the dial is can be debated, but they have the opportunity to say, look, this is a measure on climate action. This is very important. And it means then to voters, we can say this is something that's happening. And then they're more inclined to vote for a party or have climate change as their issue. But I think if we get caught in the weeds and we lose people in the policy, then people are less inclined to stick with climate change as their key issue. The easier it is to understand, the more people will buy into it.
Yeah, and so like sometimes if you speak to policymakers, they still are. I felt like they are like, oh, would people agree with this? Do people really care? But or would people really go along? But like this seems to be a big myth to me because I don't know, people in my college, young people, but also my elderly neighbors, they watch the news, they see the how disasters are getting worse, the crises, the energy crisis, which are all connected, those are getting worse. They are very aware of the climate crisis. And so it's just about, I would say, also about empowering people and finding those networks, finding those communities of pushing the government, as well as the government taking on their responsibility. And I don't know if I agree with the term leadership, because leadership really seems like a very individualistic term for me. Like there's this one white leader in the suit, Michael Martin at COP28 said leaders must lead, and I think it hasn't worked so far. And I also don't think that the two or three of them can make it work by themselves. I really think this is about people taking on the responsibility and yeah, feeling responsible for each other and for the planet and standing up, speaking out. This is what we need, and maybe that's more the leadership that I'm looking for, and as well as listening to young people, listening to the voices of those people that are impacted by climate change, not just in people were in places where there's flooding, but also students in Ireland who have such high student fees and can't afford housing, and the energy costs are rising. They are also impacted by climate change a lot because of the torn that climate impacts bring on the political systems on them. So that's all interconnected, and those things have to be solved with the climate. And I think there it's very important to also listen to each other.
You touched on a really, really good point, which is that climate change is seen as one silo or one brick, and each issue is kind of put into that different brick. So obviously housing is seen as its own thing, transport is seen as its own thing, and climate change is seen as its own thing. And I think we need to change that perspective and seek climate action as a prism to solve several solutions. So when we're looking at a housing crisis, at energy costs, at even health, that we can solve those issues and help tackle climate change. And I'm looking at health, the amount of people that may die prematurely because of heart issues, because they aren't getting enough exercise, can be solved by maybe them walking or cycling to their shops because it's safer or easier to do instead of driving. It could be when it comes to the housing crisis, looking at and something that I'm really proud to see that we're finally doing, because other countries are 40 years ahead of us. And I mean 40 years, I'm not being anecdotal. Is using the likes of district heating or reusing heat. And I only mention it because in Fingal I've been pushing it, and I've seen a new project launched in South Dublin where we're reusing excess heat from buildings to heat nearby homes. Those are ways in which we can tackle other issues, other crises, and help tackle our climate change or our climate action. And I feel like because of how we see climate change as its own silo and not a prism to tackle those issues, politicians can kind of get dug down and say, "Oh, we'll just leave that aside. We can tackle climate change then, and we can deal with these issues now," and rather not seeing them as interconnected, because everything is kind of intersectional like that.
Yeah, it is all very interconnected, and at the same time, I feel like the climate emergency, I would call it, is kind of the like eye of a needle or something, because really in the latest IPCC report that was released about 3 weeks ago, the scientists were really pushing for climate change worsens inequality, the least responsible people are the most impacted by climate change, and the other way around. 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of the emissions. It's really rich people who have created this, and poor people who suffer from the inequality and energy poverty and other problems. So it is really, really crucial that we solve this problem with thinking of the inequality going out of this. We don't just want green capitalism. We have to question whether how those systems work, or also the inequality within our own society right now, because the students that I see around me, many of them really don't have much money, and they work crazy hours in comparison to other countries where there maybe other EU countries where people don't have to pay for the studies, where public transport for students is generally just free, where housing is a lot cheaper and so much easier to find. It puts much less stress on the students. Those are things that need to be solved, problems that need to be solved for young people to be able to get engaged, for them to be able to speak up. And when I look around me, in the climate space, it is a very privileged group of people who take on those questions, and they're like, all those things are very much connected, and just, yeah, that's very important to highlight those issues as well.
Totally agree. I see
Nice.
Louise, your hand is up.
I'm like, hi, I'm waiting patiently. That was fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. Now, we've just kind of come up to time, and I actually did ask a question, but the two of you hit the nail on the head on multiple points in the last minute or so. So I'm happy out with your answer. And as I've said a couple of times now, everyone's information is available on the sign-up screen, for Lift to Live Inequality. So please reach out to Daniel, Magdalena, and any of our other speakers. If there's no questions as of right now, that's absolutely no problem, because like you are really hitting the nail on the head for everything that I've been hearing.